Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to thank actually Scott Andrews and Desi for inviting me today. I've had a lot of conversations with some recent policy changes in the 911 area, and very excited about the partnership with NAPCO and really bringing in the 911 component into your chapter and your organization. So that we're really excited to hear about that and to develop that partnership more. So many of you might not know, but we are expanding or changing some of the policies on a statewide basis for 911. We announced these at the December State 911 Advisory Board last year, and we're basically trying to do a road show out and get out to the different associations, let them know what the policy changes are. So what I'll do is I'll go over a little bit about those policy changes and the methodology. The one important thing to keep in mind is that it's really changing all of the PSAPs in California the way we're doing business. So that's where it's going to touch every PSAP. We have about 462 PSAPs in California, so that's including law enforcement, fire, and emergency medical. So that's basically what I'm going to talk about today. So the 911 office has, over the last year and a half, really looked at the way we're doing business and did analysis over many years of data of how we're actually reimbursing the different PSAPs and doing business in California. And what we've actually looked at is the policies, if you want to advance one. The policies, we're trying to realign the program. After about 20 years, it's natural that any program kind of get expanded or go beyond what is outlined in statute. So what we did is we are trying to bring that program back in alignment with the Warren Act and the Emergency Telephone Users Surcharge Account. So what that is there is a surcharge that each one of the interstate telephone bills, which you guys all pay, if you have telephone service in California, pay a surcharge in order to fund the 911 network. So that is the statute that actually provides the revenue that we use to actually provide 911 services in California. We looked at past practices of the PSAPs with respect to the what they call a CPE, which is the customer premise equipment replacement cycles, the use of the CPE equipment and the foreign language interpretation contracts, which my office governs and has the authority over those contracts, and the actual reimbursement costs for training and travel. So we also provide training and travel dollars to the different PSAPs to attend training with CalNINA and organizations just like APCO and specific 911 training in California. We also reviewed any kind of trend analysis or trending on the revenues and expenditures over the last 9 to 10 years, including the reimbursement data over the last 9 years. So a little bit about the condition of the Setna Fund. These are actual numbers that are taken off the fund condition statement, and wanted to share that with you. It looks like since 2005, we've had about a 40% decrease in revenues in the account, so we're actually struggling with that, with our expenditures remaining pretty constant over the life of the fund. So as you can see, it's projected at the end of this year is that we would have a fund balance of about $39 million. And what that means is we're actually looking at cleaning our house, really making sure that we're utilizing these funds correctly before we actually would go back to the taxpayers and ask for a surcharge increase. So we're really trying to do our homework in-house before we actually take that step. So the methodology that we went through to actually come up with our policy changes is that we reviewed the Warren Act and the statute that basically out there that governs us, and we wanted to give our proposals that would enable us to realign with those statutes. We analyzed the customer premise equipment reimbursement expenditures, the annual accrual amounts, which are what PSAPs actually accrue on an annual basis to pay for things like CPE, furniture, headsets, call loggers, and etc. And we also looked at the use of residual funds over the last 9 years. So right now, PSAPs have the ability to take whatever savings they're able in their allotment and use that towards other things like furniture and additional positions to answer 911 calls. So we looked at also all that data. And we actually compared actual travel reimbursement costs against the Cal HR or state travel rates published by the Department of Human Resources. A couple of other items that we looked at is the CPE replacement cycle over the last 8 years. Currently, right now, we do allow PSAPs to replace their CPE equipment on a 5-year cycle. We analyzed the current and potential use of the CalNINA allotment. This is the allotment, which is on a $3,000 cap per PSAP and per county coordinator in the state to attend CalNINA events or CalNINA sponsored events. And that's probably of interest also to APCO. Right now, that's going to be a change where folks will have the ability to use this money to attend events just like this if the proposed policy change is adopted. We compared the foreign language interpretation service reimbursement cost against the state contract. So we actually interpret up to about 91 different languages today when people call into 911 into the English language. And we reviewed existing regulation for wireless service provider cost responsibility. So what currently in California we do is we reimburse the carriers to provide wireless 911 in the state. So there was a ruling in 2001, 2002 by the FCC that gives the state the option to only reimburse cost from the selective router into the actual PSAP. In the state of California today, we actually provide infrastructure cost beyond the selective router, which is the demarcation point for the wireless service providers. So we also looked at that. Next. So some of the findings that came out of our methodology are really that today PSAPs have not been required to submit an annual plan as required by the Emergency Telephone User Surcharge account. The annual accrual funding process allows for expenditures outside the span of what's in law. So in law, these are the 4 items that actually gives us the ability to pay for 911, which is the basic system, a basic system with telephone central office identification, and a system employing automatic call routing, and any approved incremental costs, which today are really have been grown to residual costs. And then the current travel reimbursement costs exceed what the state is allowed by the state per diem rates. Some local agencies that you might be aware of are actually using U.S. General Services per diem rates. So we actually found that we're going beyond what the state actually pays for reimbursements. We also found that the median for CPE replacement cycle is 7 years is the median. We actually have folks from 5 years up until 15 years that various PSAPs are on a cycle to replace their equipment. So the median on that is 7 years. And we looked at about 441 PSAPs at the time of the data that's available. The CalNINA annual allotment policy does not allow for the use of funds other than 911 training opportunities. So this limits the allotment only to CalNINA sponsored events. And there's often other 911 training opportunities which would expand the use of this money. That was one of our findings. And most foreign language interpretation service reimbursement costs exceed the state contract. Today, we allow on the state contract, it's 59 cents per minute with a one-time per call charge. And then we have another contract which a lot of PSAPs use that is at $1.25 reimbursement rate, so that would be all realigned. And then the last one is the FCC regulation outlines the wireless service provider responsibilities for costs from their network to the selective router. That was one of our last findings. So on December 12th, which I spoke about before, we presented this information to the State 911 Advisory Board seeking comment, and they asked for the state office to expand that comment period from the original, I think, February 28th date to April 2nd. So we're really interested in getting input from all of our PSAPs and stakeholders and also the industry by April 2nd. And we have that outlined on our website, how you go through that and submit your comments. We are conducting stakeholder meetings with all of the association and representatives on our State 911 Advisory Board, and actually having one-on-one meetings with those entities. I believe that APCO is scheduled probably by the end of March or first part of March or the end of February that will be meeting with the chapter. And we're also doing outreach to memberships like this one, letting them know what our policy changes are and what the process is for submitting their input. So some of the next steps are proposed implementation. We changed that from April 1st. We're going to implement the changes on April 1st. Given the input has been extended to April 2nd, we are now postponing the implementation date to be determined. And as we seek input from all of you guys and all of our stakeholders, and then we're having a March State 911 Advisory Board to also have a discussion around these that will determine the implementation date based on all of that input. And then we're also going to begin analysis for the future structural deficit. I talked a little bit about how the revenues are declining and really we don't have enough money to sustain the 911 funding element for years to come. So we're going to begin analysis on fixing that structural deficit in the special fund. We're developing a formalized process to seek the board's advice on PSAP yearly spending plans. So one of the proposed policy changes is to have the PSAPs submit their annual spending plans, and we want to develop a process so that PSAPs know when they need to get that information in, how they need to do that, some of the template development to make it easier to get that information from the PSAPs themselves. And then we want to proactively manage the Setna. Everything to date has been pretty reactionary, making sure that the fund is available for the PSAPs to buy their necessary equipment for 911. We want to change that paradigm and really be proactive and be able to forecast how we're actually spending the money and when surcharge rates need to be raised. And if there's anything additional, we have nextgen 911 on the horizon, and we need to develop ways to make sure that we have enough funding to pay for those new capabilities into the system. So I'm breezing through this because I know that lunch is at noon, so I know that you guys want to go off to that, but I wanted to actually summarize. These are all of the 7 policy changes. We have projected about a $28 million annual savings with these policy changes. So that is definitely significant. We want to emphasize that we are realigning with the law, with the WARN Act and the State Surcharge Act for these policy changes. And this is how it's broken out. So in the middle column is all of the 7 policy changes, and on the right-hand side are all of the projected annual savings per policy. So it's pretty significant. You'll see that the wireless service provider is probably our biggest. So we're very interested in sunsetting that as soon as possible once the policy is vetted and adopted. So we realize that, this is going to be a different way of doing business. I genuinely am very interested in the input that we're receiving from the PSAPs. Our approach was really to put a stake in the ground. We know that there's issues with all programs statewide and with special funds, and what we wanted to do was really put a stake in the ground, do our homework, develop a methodology, and then ask for input from all of our stakeholders on should we move that stake in the ground, why should we move that, is there a better way of doing business? That's what we're really seeking on the input. To date, we've actually received several letters outlining complaints or input from the PSAPs. We are doing the analysis on that, and that will be shared at our next advisory board meeting. If APCO is going to be submitting, which I know that they're going to be submitting a letter collectively, we're really looking at the associations to give us input. Is if you do have a better way of doing business, is why should the state move that direction? And I know we're going to have conversations with APCO about that. So if you're talking with your memberships or your representatives on the State 911 Advisory Board, we encourage you guys to come from that perspective, as really as like, we know that these are hard changes, but really, is there another way of doing business? And when you evaluate it, if the impact is so great, what is that impact? I mean, being able to articulate that so that we understand, leaving that operations expertise in your hands. And then finally, I wanted to wrap up as just of the timeline. So there's been a lot of conversation on, how did the state approach this? When did you guys start? There's been a lot of conversations since I was appointed back in 2010. And this is basically a high-level timeline of all the activities. The one good thing is we've made this presentation available on our website. We have the video of the State 911 Advisory Board, if anyone would like to watch that and look at their representative. Right now, as Lisa Hoffman is on the State 911 Advisory Board. I know APCO is going through an appointment process to have another selection. I think Chuck is the person that has been selected, so we're just waiting for governor appointee approval on that. But working through your State 911 Advisory Board representative with that input, and actually I checked your NAPCO website this morning, and that information is out there. So I encourage you guys to go out there and submit your input that way. So that kind of wraps up my presentation. It was very short and sweet. The other thing, though, is that we have an operations meeting, I believe, at 1 o'clock, where it's going to, which I think is probably the most valuable part, is it's going to allow questions from any of you guys to be asked towards me. I'll try to answer these off the cuff, and what I can't answer today, we will definitely follow up on that. So that kind of concludes my presentation. And I don't know if you want to take questions here
if you
or
wouldn't mind, I don't
yeah,
know if they
definitely.
have any.
Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, Mark Anderson, Santa Clara County. Is the funding shortfall as a result of fewer landlines? Is it only landing on landlines, or is it not on the cellular phone bills as well?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. We attribute it. Nobody really knows. So actually, all of the states are dealing with the same issue. So I meet with other state 911 directors across the nation. We really attribute it to people moving to landlines. CTIA just released a study on that almost 30%, which is almost double what it was last year, of people only having wireless phone for their primary phone service, and then bundled packages. So the other thing is bundled services are a flat rate. So before you used to have $200 phone bills, $300 phone bills. Now you have a $39.99 flat rate, and that's what the surcharge is based on. It's a 0.05% of the total interstate telephone charge. So when we used to get that charge on $300, now we get it on $39.99. So that's what we're attributing it to, is cellular, people moving to cellular technology and away from disconnecting their landline and bundled packages. Excellent question.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Your analysis of the cost and the life cycle of those existing phone systems, because we're in the middle of a technology change here, both for our voice radios and also for our telephone systems, what we're seeing is that we're going from a back room of hard equipment that has a long lifespan to more of an IP network. We're talking about routers and switches now. And in most cases, a lot of the vendors of those products have put support lifespans on them kind of short because they want to sell more.
Right.
So what ends up happening is after the 5 years of that maintenance contract, all of a sudden that maintenance contract is going to ramp up radically because they don't want you to keep it anymore.
Right.
And so they want to cost you out. And also we're seeing that the next generation of loggers have to be now IP loggers because they're going to be IP phone systems. So those are expensive with very expensive package deals. And the whole thing revolves around software now. So if you've tried to buy anything lately, the software licensing fees, the software security updates, the cost. We're seeing that we're currently in negotiations to get a next-gen 911 phone system, and we're seeing the cost of the system alone is 3 to 5 times more than it was before. Right. So I'm a little concerned that your data that you compiled over this 7-year life cycle span it's going to change a lot in the next gen that we buy, and that we are going to fall short, I think.
Yeah, you know, and that's what we're finding right now. We have 5 next-gen pilot projects in California, and the cost to the PSAP is really similar. So the equipment is really similar, even though the equipment is not next-gen ready across all of the market spaces. But on the network side, we're seeing 3 to 5 times. So that's what the state is responsible for. And you're absolutely right. So that was one of the areas that we are looking at of fixing the future deficit. We do think that the methodology or how we collect the surcharge is going to have to change. And because of it's the 0.05% of the interstate telephone calls, we know we're going to have to go to some other methodology. What that other methodology, we don't know. There are some states that have a per phone charge or a per device charge. I think, you know, as the ability to connect to 911 also is going to expand, right? So also it's not just going to be your phones, it's going to be alerts and sensors out there that are going to have the automatic notification into 911. There's already the medical device companies are looking at medical devices like heart monitors and so forth, that when there's an issue or a diabetes patient, that it will automatically, if they go in a coma, it will recognize that and call 911 or send a 911. So the medical community is also developing devices to interact with 911. Today, we don't have a mechanism to actually apply the surcharge to those because it's not an intrastate telephone call, it's on the IP network. So we're using our pilot projects to actually collect data. In the Northeast Grant Project up in Butte County, which Weedy and her staff is available, has been very instrumental in that. We're looking at, we put in an IP-based infrastructure, and we now have 37 PSAPs on an IP-based infrastructure. We're using all of that data to see what it's costing, what is the models that have to be in the future, and then also expanded capabilities, right? So we don't have any applications right now or any other of the devices that I talked about that can actually run that network, but that's what we're doing. We're trying to do the foundation and homework in order for us to put the models necessary to then inform the legislature that has to change the laws to then collect the surcharge, and all of that needs to be all vetted out. So it's a very complicated issue, and NextGen's coming down the pipeline. There's no additional mandates and no additional funding for that. So, as it is today. So a very complicated issue.
Just one more thing.
Yep.
So do you see on the radar maybe that we may be looking more towards centralized phone switches that are shared by multiple PSAPs as opposed to building individual silos? Kind of like what we're doing in the LMR world is we're starting to take our small silos and make bigger silos. Do you envision something like that as a possibility as we move forward in areas that can accommodate such a thing? Right.
So our concept design, which we're looking at, is regional networks tied together. So, you know, what is in the state, we're not sure if it's going to be 4 regions. But like I said, in the Northeast Grant Project, there's now 37 PSAPs tied together on an IP infrastructure. In Butte County, they have a sub-hosted architecture where 7 PSAPs are connected together. So we're now starting to try to regionalize these networks, what it's going to look like. We're waiting for these other 4 to come online and to see what vendors and architectures actually work the best, and then getting a more regional approach. I think there's probably going to be 2, 4, or 6, or 8 region networks that are going to be tied together probably at the end of this whole thing. But right now we don't know. We're using these pilot projects to kind of vet out all that.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Nancy?
Just a couple quick questions on where you're at with feedback you're getting. Almeida had put in an RFI request to the state with the deadline for tomorrow. Do you know if some of that or all of that information is going to be available to those of us through Almeida who are trying to put something together for the state?
Yeah, that's why I had to leave a little bit earlier. They wanted to know where that was. Not Calnina, but my boss. So, yeah, we're developing a response to that RFI questionnaire. I think there was, I can't remember, 7 to 10 questions on that. So we'll be developing a response to that and submitting that. And I'm sure Calnina will then blast it out to their membership. And then, like I said, we're having a one-on-one meeting with APCO representatives, and how they share their information with their membership, they'll determine that. But we're trying to respond to all of the questions in a timely fashion. And then one thing that I didn't share with you guys is there is a virtual town hall that is on February 22nd. What we're encouraging people is actually, we have folks that have submitted letters, and because of all of more information or more questions, they've actually asked for the letters back to change their letter, to resubmit it. So we're doing a virtual town hall on February 22nd from 1:30 to 3:30. So I sent out a statewide a notice to all the PSAP managers and county coordinators. So if your 911 county coordinator should be sharing that information with you, or you can always contact our office and we can send you the registration link. And what I will be doing is giving the same presentation, but the one thing it does allow folks to do is, I believe by February 20th, if you get us questions ahead of time and it tells you in their instructions on how to do that, we will actually be answering those questions in the virtual town hall. So, you can rely on CalNINA to for the response on the RFI, or you can also do the separate process if you're not a CalNINA member or you have specific questions to your PSAP. We will try to take that information, if you get it into us by February 20th, and answer it at the town hall.
One more question there.
Go ahead.
On the, go back one slide, the wireless.
Reimbursement policy?
Policy, the
Yep.
19 million there, that's the lion's share of the 28 million that we're hoping to save here. Have you gotten any pushback from the wireless providers yet as far as they're fighting that, or is that something that's going to be?
Yes, we have met with the wireless service providers, and no, we are not getting pushback. So there are several wireless service providers that do not request reimbursement. So I sent a letter out to all the wireless service providers in California, which are different than the other states. And we gave them till January 31st to set up a one-on-one meeting with us. And we met with the ones that requested that. And we look like that will be moving forward. I know that one of the questions in the CalNINA RFI is, will there be additional impacts to the PSAPs? And we don't believe there will be. This is specifically, this reimbursement is specific for wireless infrastructure cost. So the state today pays 5 cents for every telephone number on a subscriber. So that is a lot of money, and we would like to sunset that as soon as possible. Yeah, Des, or here's a question.
Yeah. The question I had was, you were talking about like when this bundle went from like a $300 bill to
Right.
$39.95.
Right.
Are you going to be suggesting that they do like a flat, since they're doing a flat rate, do a flat rate on bundles?
We don't know, because like I said, that's just something, I think there's a lot of information out there, but that's what we want to look at when we do our analysis on fixing the structural deficit and moving forward on what we'll have to do. Is right now the surcharge is only applied to interstate telephone calls and voice over IP calls. But like I said, there's going to be all kinds of devices out there that are now going to have the ability to get into 911. So I think we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the percentage of surcharge, whether it needs to be a flat rate or continue to be a percentage of those calls.
And a second question, since everybody has asked something. Things like, is 911 going to start supporting people that are sending basically IP posts saying, I know that some have been receiving pictures and like saying, hey, there's an accident at
Right.
First in Maine or something like that.
Right. So the goal of NextGen 911 is texting photos and video into the 911 center. We did public outreach statewide. We did 6 public meetings last year, and we produced a report on some of those findings. We are moving towards NextGen, but there's still a lot of conversations on the impact of the additional data into the 911 center, and also whether the dispatcher should be even receiving that, or is that supplementary information that should just go to the first responder. So there's a whole bunch of conversations that still need to be done on NextGen. We recently, last week, released an RFI for text to 911. So we are actually soliciting the marketplace on text to 911 capabilities and see what it would take. And also the FCC just released their further notice of proposed rulemaking in December and asking for comments on what the impact of text to 911 would be into a PSAP, and also any of the interim solutions that, like TDY capability, using web capability to receive text from the citizens. So all of those comments are due by March 11th. And so if that's something that the PSAPs are interested in weighing in, I encourage you guys to submit your FCC responses to the FCC and on your perspective on the impact of operations. So there's still a lot of conversations to be had on the next gen stuff. And there's security issues, there's whether the image is actually a real image or has been modified. All of those questions need to be answered. Yeah. And then Desi, you had a question?
You were mentioning the legislative things that you were going to look at going to the legislator and maybe getting some fees updated. What's your timeline for that process?
You know, we don't know. We'd like to do our homework first. Like I said, our first process was to clean our house, right? Make sure we're using this money and try to put processes and procedures and realign the program back with law. And then I think the next step is going to be whether these proposed policy changes get adopted, a subset of these proposed policy get adopted, or we take them off the table. And then the next step is to do our analysis on the structural deficit. And once we get all of that done, if there's something that comes out, we would share that with the legislature. We're updating the legislature on a constant basis on what we're doing, and also the administration.